Hey guys, Cody here with On the Trail, and today we're going to be putting a gold valve by RaceTech in our modern twin chamber cartridge fork. Stay tuned. So in this presentation, we're going to be breaking this all out in a three-part series. First, we're going to be talking about why revalving can be a very worthwhile upgrade. And then we're going to show you the actual installation of the gold valve. Then we will show you the results of the build and actually taking you out on the trail. And we'll be comparing and contrasting the stock suspension to the new aftermarket RaceTech setup. Disclaimer, this first episode is going to be delving into the inner workings and theory behind suspension, so if you're not mechanically inclined nor care about such things, it would be best if you probably skipped to the next episode. That being said, let's get started. The first step in laying out a logical case for the gold valve is to put forth a few premises behind modern suspension. Modern suspension consists of chassis geometry, spring forces, and damping forces. All of these are critical, however, we're only focusing on damping forces. And it's important to mention that before you begin focusing on suspension damping, you must make sure that the first two criteria are in check first. Moving on, damping is the absorption of energy. It absorbs energy from the ground and rebounding energy from the spring. In our case, and in most cases, this comes from restricting oil flow through various orifices. With those premises being put forth, the next biggest variable in damping is the rate at which oil is forced through the orifices. This is determined by suspension shaft speed. This aspect of damping is exactly why valving is so critical, and let's take a look at some damping curves and we'll really show you how this affects your suspension. In this figure, we're looking at the progressive damping curve of a fixed orifice. And what we mean by a progressive curve is that you will see that as shaft speed increases, so does the damping exponentially. This is the key component, is it increases exponentially. You can pause this to study it if need be, but with this system, very quickly with the same damping that felt great over some small low speed bumps, and it also felt real grippy and planted through corners, it will become stiff as a board and feel like a jackhammer when you start running over some higher speed rocks and tree roots. And this is the pitfall of a fixed orifice, is you cannot get the best of both worlds between high and low speed damping. With valving, however, we can modulate damping curves over the progression of shaft speeds to achieve a linear or even digressive damping curve as shown here. You will see here that with the low shaft speeds, the damping remains firm, while at higher speeds it will actually become relatively softer, which will give you the traction and control you need through corners and additional plushness and control over very sharp edge bumps at moderate to high speeds, thus enabling more comfort and control to the rider overall. So now that we've put forth the basic theory behind damping, let's actually look at the compression valves to see how they work and why the gold valve and revalving can be much better. Here's the stock compression valving that came out of my bike. It's important to note that the rebound valving works very similarly. Let's break these images down so you can understand why this stock valving is frankly terrible. So, during the compression stroke, oil is being forced from the top of the piston to the other side of the piston in a cylinder. And there are two ways for it to get there. One, oil is going to be forced through the center of this post here, past a needle you can't see, roughly in here, and it's going to exit through ports here. This is what we call the low speed valve. Typically, shims can be added here over the ports of the low speed valve for a more linear and modulated damping curve. In this case, however, which you can't directly see in the image, they only added just a few small shims to fill the space. So really, this is a adjustable fixed orifice. Wait, didn't we say orifice damping curves suck? Well, there's another way, and we'll break that down. So, the second way oil gets to the other side of this piston is if enough oil pressure and volume is built up from the shaft speed along with the restriction of the low speed valve, then the high speed valve will actually open to allow additional oil flow. In this case, the shim stack will bend under pressure and allow oil to flow from these feed ports out between the face of the piston and the shim stacks. This is actually what creates our linear and digressive damping curves. Now you'll see here that this shim stack is humongous. Now it's time to use some imagination and critical thinking. How much pressure do you think it would take to make that shim stack bend to provide any alleviation to the low speed circuit? Probably a lot. So basically from the factory, what you are riding is an adjustable fixed orifice style damping fork with a high speed pressure bleed off in case you happen to hit an anvil out on the trail. And this explains exactly why in this example, this terrain has got me bouncing all over the place. And in this example, where I thought I might have bent my forks, the impact actually got soaked up relatively nicely for what it was. So in my opinion, I think this is garbage. I think it's ridiculous. Let's take a look at the gold valve now. Here we can see that inside the low speed valving, we actually have a shim stack for our low speed valve. And this is going to create a more linear damping curve even at your lower shaft speeds. As for the high speed circuit, we actually have huge feed ports, and you can see that the shim stack is much thinner. This is going to allow the high speed circuit to start operating at much lower shaft speeds, thus enabling tree roots, rocks, and all that good stuff at moderate speeds to not really kick the front end around as bad as it did. Now if you pay very close attention, there's actually even a high speed crossover stack for more damping modulation at different shaft speeds, ranging from medium to medium high to even very high shaft speeds. And all of this is going to improve comfort, traction, and handling over harsh terrain. And you might think that the downside is inadequate bottoming resistance, and this isn't even the case either, since the outer chamber acts as an air spring during the last third of the stroke. So the benefit of a suspension revalve, to me, is honestly a no-brainer. Now with all of that being said, we'll take a look at the installation itself in part 2.